Good evening, everybody. My name is Jim Freyer. This is a special joint meeting of the Finance and Claims Committee and the Board of Estimate and Taxation on February 24th at 6:30 p.m. I'd like to take the roll call first. I have let's see who else do I have. I got myself. Rich Ballinger,
Here.
not there. Joanne. Joanne's here. Nicole Eady. Are you here, Nicole?
Yeah.
And did I miss anybody? I think that's it. So we have a quorum. And Ed, I'll turn it over to you. You get the role for the BET.
Absolutely, thank you.
This is Marcia. I'm city clerk. I'm happy to do it as well.
Thank you, Marcia. Go right ahead.
No problem. Good evening, everybody. Excuse me. Mayor Smith, Mr. Abrams,
Here.
Mr. Constant,
Here.
Mr. Jalret,
Here.
Mr. Kasimis,
Here.
Ms. Yang.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody in the audience that would like to talk? We have public participation now for anything on the agenda. You have 3 minutes to speak.
Okay, we have one person here. Is it Mario? Masha.
So you have 3 minutes and you have to address yourself to the item that's on the agenda.
Good evening. My name is Monty Jankowski, reside at 8 Fordham Drive. And my concern that why I want to speak was regarding the budget that's being proposed and put forth to the city council later this evening.
Well, at the city council meeting is following this at 7:30. And we do not have any of the budget on the council agenda today. We're going through the how we do bonding and so forth.
Okay, I can address these comments at the later meeting.
Certainly welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks. Is there anybody online that would like to speak?
There's nobody at this time.
Okay, then I'll close public participation. So the first item on the agenda this evening is a presentation of the Unistat services regarding the annual debt and bond rating review. So I'll did you want to say something first? So I'll just turn it over to Jared Schmidt, our CFO, to introduce our speaker for this evening.
Thank you, Chairman. We have Bill Lindsay with us from Unistat. He's our municipal financial advisor, and he's got a presentation that I believe you all have a hard copy of and was emailed out earlier today. And he's just going to really talk about our debt, our capital plan a little bit, but really give some insight into the process that we go through with the rating agencies and their scorecards and how they come up with their ratings for different times. So without any further ado, we don't have a ton of time. And so I'd rather, leave it as much as I can to Bill and for you guys to ask questions. So
Great.
Bill.
Thanks, Jared. So I don't know, Jared, everyone, I saw Tom passing out hard copies of the presentation. Do I need to share my screen on that, or?
It might be helpful to share your screen since we do have some people online.
Okay. All right. So hopefully you can all see that. So again, as Jared said, my name is Bill Lindsay. I am the city's financial advisor for debt issuance. And so really tonight what we're going to talk about is we're going to review the credit rating methodologies for both Moody's ratings and Standard and Poor's. We're going to talk about the city's recent rating experience with those two rating agencies and what the results of those rating discussions were. And then we're going to also discuss the city's current debt load as well as projections for future debt loads and how that will affect or could affect the city's overall bond rating. What I wanted to just kind of discuss at the beginning here is to say to you all that there are two different major credit ratings at the city rating agencies that the city is using currently, and each one of them has their own published methodology. They use inputs of similar rating factors, but they kind of weigh them a little bit differently individually. So what we're going to do is we're going to walk through both the Moody's and S&P methodology at a high level and discuss what they refer to as a scorecard approach. What they're trying to do is simplify their process and ultimately produce a numeric score that would map to what the types of credit ratings that we're used to hearing about, like AAA, AA, single A, etc. So they try to quantify it to varying degrees of success, I'll say, but I'll try to walk you through that so you get a sense as to how they develop those ratings and what goes into those ratings. So to begin with, obviously the city is fortunate, and through its hard work and diligence over a number of years, does have the highest credit ratings from both Moody's and S&P. Moody's is AAA with two small A's, where S&P is AAA with all large, three large A's. But first, we're gonna dive into the way that Moody's develops their credit ratings and what goes into their rating scorecard. So here you have an infographic from Moody's where they demonstrates not just the overall buckets, if you will, of information that they use, or the topics, which is on the left-hand side, and you can see what the weightings for each of those topics are. So the main areas of focus are the local economy, financial performance, institutional framework, which I'll explain in a minute, and then what they refer to as leverage. And you can see what the weightings are there. Economy, financial performance, leverage, all are 30% weighting. And then the institutional framework is a 10% weighting. On the moving across the slide from left to right now, if we focus on each of the individual buckets that they're looking at, so economy first, a total of 30% weight that goes into that metric. They're pulling three data points or sub factors to calculate that score. So it would be resident incomes, full value per capita. So that's the market value of the grand list on a per capita basis. And then what Moody's will refer to as economic growth. It's really comparing the GDP for the region versus the national GDP, a change over a 5-year period. So that's how they develop their economy score. And in subsequent slides, we'll get into what the individual factor scores are for the city for each of these areas. But I just wanted to give you a bit of an overview here to start. So that's the economy. For financial performance, they look at really two factors: available fund balance ratio and then what they call liquidity ratio. So I'll explain those to you. Available fund balance ratio, I think, is it goes beyond just the city's general fund. So we all know, about the general fund and its fund balance, but Moody's is taking a more holistic view of the government, of the governmental entity here. And so they're not just considering the operating fund of the city or the general fund, but they're also factoring in the enterprise funds. So the parking fund and the WPCA fund, as well as the city's internal service fund. So they're looking at the sum of those fund balances across all four of those funds. Similarly, with what they refer to as liquidity ratio, that's a measure of the amount of cash that's in each of those four funds. So again, not just the operating fund or general fund, but general fund, WPCA, parking fund, and internal service funds, comparing that cash to the overall revenues of those funds. So now institutional framework here, institutional framework. This is a concept that both Moody's and S&P will use. They're trying to define the statutory framework that local governments within Connecticut operate under. So they apply one score, this institutional framework score, to all municipalities within the state of Connecticut. And it's really based on, things like, are there tax caps in Connecticut? No, they're not. Thankfully, you have the ability, theoretically anyway, to raise taxes without a restriction, at least by statute. But they also take into account things like collective bargaining. So Connecticut is mandatory collective bargaining state. So in the case of Moody's, their institutional framework score for Connecticut is AA. Okay, so every town so whether it's the smallest town or the largest city, they all get a AA score for this 10% metric from Moody's. The last thing that Moody's looks at is under that leverage category. So really what this is the combination of all of the long-term liabilities of the city. So that would include pension liability, that would include retiree benefits liability, as well as the debt that the city issues to fund capital projects, that you're very familiar with. But Moody's has put those three things, pension, debt, and OPEB, all at equal footing here. And so what they're doing is they're measuring two metrics. One is they refer to as long-term liability ratio, which is basically the outstanding amount of all of those three liabilities. Okay, so pension, OPEB, and debt compared to the operating revenue. And then they look at what they refer to as a fixed cost ratio, which is what I'll call like the carrying charge, the amount of money that the city has to fund annually to service those liabilities. So in the case of debt, we'd call it debt service, but it's really the sum of what the actuarial determined pension contribution, actuarial determined OPEB contribution, and debt service, the sum of those three amounts annually compared to revenues. The final piece here for Moody's methodology is, if you get down the bottom, what they'll do is they'll take these four buckets, if you will, these four major metric, factors they refer to them as, and then they'll come up with like an indicative rating score, and then they have the ability to make some what they refer to as notching factors, below the line adjustments here, either upwards or downwards for certain other considerations, things like having additional strength in local resources outside of the funds that they normally would look at. As an example, none of these notching factors apply to the city, so I'm showing them here really more for reference than anything else. But that's kind of the general overall approach that Moody's takes. From a high level, it's important to keep in mind that even though the city has a AAA score from Moody's for that for their overall rating score, or the assigned rating, the city does not score AAA for every one of those factors that we just looked at. All right. And there's going to be within those factors certain strengths and certain weaknesses. And ideally, as one of those factors is worsening or weakening, there would be an offsetting positive to mitigate that weakness. And so that's really what I think one of the major takeaways of this conversation should be for you, is that, we're talking about this in the context of debt, and the capital plan, but debt really only, it has a 10% weighting under Moody's methodology. And so to the extent that the debt is going up, which we know it's going to go up because of the capital projects that have been approved and need to be financed, that weakness needs to be offset by other credit strengths of the city if the city wishes to maintain its current rating. And those other or offsetting credit strengths are the areas that I think that we really need to be cognizant of, that need to offset what from a credit perspective is a forward going weakness in the prospective debt load of the city. To drill down on that a little bit deeper, when we look at financial performance, and I'll show you the Moody's scorecard on the next slide, but the net score that the city currently has is only a AA. So it's not a AAA score based on finances. As a matter of fact, the available fund balance ratio is only a score of A. Right. And so that is, one of those areas of potential weakness that we need to be cognizant of, going forward as the city continues to increase its debt load. Positively, the city does have a AAA score for liquidity ratio. So again, liquidity ratio is the amount of cash that is in the general fund, the enterprise funds, and the internal service fund, whereas obviously the fund balance ratio is just that fund balance. But looking at the 25 operating results, the fund balance levels were declined in at least in the general fund, internal service fund in FY25. I mentioned this earlier. So here, Moody's, criteria does apply an equal weight to debt, pension, and OPEB. And in particular, pension and OPEB are currently a credit strength of the city. They're both very well funded, which offsets the prospective debt load that the city will be taking on. But again, those are factors we need to be cognizant of going forward. If those pension levels were to decline due to adverse investment returns, that would be a weakness that we need to be aware of, and monitor what the effect would be on the overall credit rating. So now we'll look at what the actual Moody's scorecard is. So we talked about their methodology and how they go about developing this scorecard ratio, what the weightings and the factors that they consider. So this is from the August 25 rating report from the last time the city came to market. And on the left-hand side here, you'll see, those buckets where those major areas that they look at: economy, financial performance, leverage, right? You can see institutional framework, and then the actual measurement, if you will, the calculation of each of those factors or ratios and what the numeric score is. And they're giving us a weighting, and then what they're doing is they're mapping that measurement under the measure heading to come up with an individual score. So here you can see for economy, resident income is very strong. It's AAA. Full value of the grand list. It's one of the largest grand lists in the state. Is very strong at AAA. Economic growth metric is only an A score. Again, this is a comparison of the GDP within the metropolitan statistical area that the city is in versus national GDP, and what the compound annual growth rate is over a 5-year period. Unfortunately, Connecticut has lagged in national GDP growth for a couple decades now. So that is not not my favorite metric that they use, but it is one of their data points. And unfortunately, it's not a particularly strong score there. But I think the one that's more importantly that I mentioned earlier was that available fund balance ratio. Again, you see the A score for that, which again is a potential area of concern as we move, as the city moves forward and continues to increase its debt load. You can also see the leverage scores here. Again, these are affected in a positive manner because of the strong funding for pension and OPEB. But what I did want to point out was the overall scorecard indicated rating based on Moody's their methodology is a AA2. It's not AAA. It's actually 2 notches below AAA. And what they say in their report, and I've given you the quote at the bottom, is that the way they're able to get to a headline rating or an assigned rating of AAA from AA2 is the nominal strength of the city's reserve levels, so really fund balance, and their ongoing economic development, which offsets what they're considering that economic weaker growth area for the MSA. But again, here what they're saying to us is, listen, historically the cities have very strong reserves, which are help bringing the overall rating up to AAA from a scorecard generated rating of AA2, and they're specifically citing reserves. So if reserves were to weaken or continue to weaken as they did in 2025, there's a strong possibility that they would not make that below the line adjustment, if you will, to move the rating from the scorecard indicated rating of AA2 to the AAA headline rating that the city currently enjoys. So that's the Moody's their methodology and what the city's current Moody's score is. So I want to take a minute just to dive into S&P so you have a sense of how they go about developing their rating. So here, in this graphic across the top, they're using the same buckets, if you will, just with changing the weighting a little bit. So again, economy, financial performance. Standard & Poor's splits finance into 2 different buckets. One, they refer to financial performance, which is a 3-year average of operating results or the difference between revenues and expenditures. Here, Standard & Poor's only looks at the general fund. They don't get into the other funds that I mentioned with Moody's. But they do split financial performance and reserves up separately. And each one has a 20% rating. So if you roll that up, that's a 40% rating for finance for Standard & Poor's. So 10% more than Moody's. Standard & Poor's does apply a 20% score for management. And when they review management, it does not mean the CFO or the finance office. It's the collective financial management of the city, inclusive of the Board of Education. So it's the BET, it's this, both of the 2 bodies that are here tonight. It's the BET, the Board of Ed and the Finance Department, all considered one entity. And they're looking at a number of factors that I'll talk about in a second here. And then finally, debt and liabilities at 20%. So those are the major areas that they look at. If you drill down under the local government section in the bottom of that first box, you can see the individual factors that they're looking at. So, for economy, they look at what they refer to as it's the gross county product for the as a percent for the county, or in this case the MSA versus the US. So kind of similar to Moody's, but S&P is also looking at, again, an income metric here. They use per capita personal income instead of family income, but in any event, it is an income-based metrics that they're looking at under the economy, so not dissimilar from Moody's. We talked about finances and reserves. Management, they'll get into, they'd assign individual scores for the budget practices and budget development, which is about a third. They'll look at long-term planning of the city. So, operational planning long-term, and obviously the capital planning on a long-term basis, about a third of that score. And then adopted policies that the city has for things like fund balance, debt is about a third of the score. And then when finally debt and liabilities, S&P is a little bit different here. They're not considering OPEB directly, whereas Moody's put pension, OPEB, and debt all on equal footing. Here, S&P is only looking at pension and debt, and they're measuring three things. They're measuring that same carrying cost, if you will, but again, excluding OPEB, the amount to service the debt. They look at the overall debt on a per capita basis, and then they look at that. They specifically look at pension liabilities on a per capita basis. So you're splitting off pension and OPEB, pension and debt, excuse me, and measuring those separately. The one thing is they don't look at OPEB directly in these metrics, which, for most issuers would be a positive. For the city, really isn't, because the city's OPEB fund is so well funded. But again, it's a little bit different methodology than Moody's with similar considerations, but they're weighing them differently, as you can see here. So when we move to the actual S&P scorecard rating, again, their numeric score, they present the data a little bit differently. They're actually using showing us the numeric score, whereas Moody's was mapping it to AA, AAA, single A, right? What we're used to when we talk about credit ratings. Here, first S&P gives us the actual numeric score, and then what I've given you down below is how they map that to the actual rating. So I'll walk you through this briefly, so you get a sense of where the strengths and the weaknesses are. So here we talked about institutional framework with Moody's. S&P has their own institutional framework score. They carve that out, and they do that separately at the onset. They view the same statutory environment that Moody's does, but S&P has a little more favorable view of it. So they give all 169 Connecticut municipalities a AAA score, or 1. So here, it's like golf. The lower the numbers, the better. So 1 being the best, 6 being the worst. Everyone gets a AAA score for institutional framework. And then what they do is they drill down, and we'll skip the individual credit profile. I'll come back to that. What they do is, again, each of those rating factors that we looked at, the buckets, if you will, economy, financial performance, reserves and liquidity, management, debt, and pension, they assign an individual score. So the individual score for economy is a 1, which is the highest score, and you can see what that would be down here, 1 being the AAA. Financial performance, again, so this is a 3-year average of the revenues versus expenditures. The city scoring a 2, which would be a AA plus, right? And then reserves and liquidity, again, general fund only is a 1, so that's a AAA score. Management, which again, was those 3 areas they look at: budget development, long-term planning, policies, is a 1.35, so it's still a AAA score. But then when we get the debt and liabilities, in S&P's view, it's a weaker score given the city's debt load at 3.25. So if we come down here and we try to map that 3.25, that's somewhere between AA minus and an A plus. So much farther out the rating scale. When we apply those weights that I mentioned earlier, 20% for economy, 40% for finances, 20% for management, 20% for debt and pension, that rolls up to what they call an individual credit profile of, or ICP of 1.72. So that's the numeric score, the overall rating score for the city. And then if we come down here to the mapping, we can see what that is that's right on the cusp between AAA and AA plus. Okay. But I think, again, the important takeaways here are the city isn't getting a AAA score for every single one of these factors. There are some strengths and weaknesses in the view of S&P. Finances is a strength, and you can see what those scores are, offsetting the weakness of debt and pension, really debt. Here, the debt is in the view of S&P is a significant weakness, and it's all the way out to, somewhere between an AA minus and an single A plus score. But what I want to caution you on is if those offsetting strengths in finances were to continue to deteriorate, that weakness around the debt score is going to be the driving factor in potentially changing the rating in a downward movement or a rating downgrade. All right. So that was, I wanted to provide that information to kind of paint the picture of how the credit rating agencies go about rating the city, because it's counterintuitive, quite honestly, that we go to the credit rating agencies when there's a debt issuance, and so we associate the rating with debt, but it's not exclusively debt. There are other factors that are considered that that I think are important to be aware of that, and what the direction of each of those things are currently. But with respect to debt and debt capacity, and we've talked about this with at least the BET for a couple of years now. Going back a few years, we did some calculations. We, being Munistat, did some calculations to say, listen, based on the total amount of debt that's in the 5-year plan and the direction that debt load is going, what is the kind of threshold that would potentially change the city's credit rating, for specifically looking at debt? Okay, and when we did that, we determined it was originally a number that was below $600 million. Moody's changed their credit rating methodology late in calendar year 2024, and they did it generally to the positive for the city. And so we were able to increase that debt capacity number, that threshold, to 650 million, which using the current 2025 audit of the city, I think is still, we were able to reaffirm that earlier this month for the CFO in his transmittal letter. But the city is rapidly approaching that $650 million threshold. So looking forward to the end of this fiscal year, the city, and this is a general fund measurement only, so we're not considering the self-supporting debt for WPCA and the parking authority. And this is only a measurement of principal. Don't take interest into consideration here, because that's not the way that the Moody's is measuring the debt load. But it's $439 million at the end of this fiscal year. And there is still $102 million before the 26-27 capital budget gets adopted that needs to be financed, is yet to be financed. So you put those two numbers together, you're looking at $540 million. When we start the upcoming fiscal year on July 1st. So here, what I've given you is a breakdown of that $102 million of debt that's previously been authorized but is yet to be issued. And we've broken it down for you by capital budget year. And the point that the takeaway here, I think, should be is just because you approve the capital budget in any one given year doesn't mean we go out and finance the whole amount of that budget immediately, or even within that fiscal year. The actual borrowings are done, financed based on the city's forward, burn rate on cash going forward for the next 12 months. So the finance office will get with the departments and say, hey, what is the actual timing of these projects? Are they going to be, in construction, in the next 12 months, or are there lead times for design? Are there lead times for permitting? Are there other issues that the project need to be staged? So what is the timing of that? And that's how we determine the sizing when we actually come to market. So again, the takeaway here is just because the capital budget gets approved in 1 year doesn't mean that it's financed in that year. So it does allow a bit of a relief valve, if you will, because as we're approaching that debt capacity or that debt threshold of 650 million, doesn't mean that you're going to pierce it in necessarily 1 year where the capital budget is approved. It's going to be done over there is a little bit of more time to be built into this for consideration. So the next slide here is what I refer to as the debt waterfall. What we're doing is we're kind of going forward and projecting for you, when the city is going to approach that $650 million threshold. So here you can see, this is kind of a additions reductions. We've got a starting balance of that 439 million. You can see what we've done is we've taken that $102 million of authorized but issued debt. We amortize it evenly over 5 years. Again, just for for conversation purposes. And then we're adding in what the estimates are for the upcoming 26-27 capital budget, as well as the other years within the 5-year CIP. We've made adjustments for a couple of large school projects that we know have a significant grant funding. Again, the capital spending amount here is the gross amount of the spending. We know there's a large grant offset for a number of these projects, so we've taken that into consideration as a reduction as each of the individual or annual, I should say, payments of principal on to service the debt. And then we end up with an ending balance. And you can see, that thankfully or positively, the city is approaching that threshold in 2031-32, but doesn't actually exceed, our estimated debt capacity. So there is time between now and there is some time here until the city would hit that number, but it's headed in that direction, and I think that's the important takeaway. So in conclusion, the city's strong history of economic and financial performance and stability are the real foundations for the AAA ratings. Historically, the strong liquidity and reserve levels, as well as as I mentioned, pension and OPEB funding, are really offsets to the increasing debt load. But as that debt load increases, and that's really a credit weakness, it's important that the city maintains those offsetting credit strengths in other areas. And the financial performance in particular, with a 30% weighting from Moody's and a 40% weighting from S&P, is much more likely to drive the city's credit rating going forward than the debt load, individually. And as I mentioned a couple of times, the reserve levels did weaken in 2025, and those are already low for both the sector, meaning AAA local governments, as well as the geographic medians for Fairfield County. So it's important that the city maintain those strong reserve levels if it wants to maintain its AAA rating. So I know we had you have the full city council meeting at 7:30, so we have a hard stop. So I know, Jared, we wanted to leave some time for questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This has really been very thorough and really informative. And I hope all the other members of the committee have had an opportunity to really take a look at this and get an idea of what we're talking about. It's easy to pay it lip service, and not know what's behind it and what the levers are that you move to make it to get to that AAA. So I think there are a couple of do you want to just just say a few words?
Sure.
Johan?
Bill, thanks a lot. So, if I understand correctly, the city is in a strong fiscal position because of the factors such as the credit ratings, the liquidity, cash on hand to pay bills on time, without any sort of financial distress, responsible management of long-term liabilities, retirement benefits, etc., and also the healthy reserves, but somewhat lower than some of its peers with AAA rating. So is the caution not so much the debt level, but the city's ability to maintain healthy reserves?
Yeah, I think so. Yes. Short answer, yes, because the between Moody's has a 30% weighting for financial performance, and S&P is at 40%, and so I think just given the weightings alone, that's going to be the real driver of the direction of the city's rating.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Jim, can I ask something? Make a
Yes, please. Go ahead, Ms. Yang.
So, number one, thank you, Bill, for always laying this out in very simple terms for a very complicated topic. Number two, I want to congratulate Jared and Chitsune for a stellar job of cleaning up the debt waterfall. So I have looked at, this is last year's debt waterfall, and the finance department has done a great job, as far as I can see, in going back and looking at authorized but unissued, cleaning that up and cleaning up the debt load. So I agree, and I'm beginning to appreciate that the debt issue is not the issue. If the message here that you're delivering is that we need to have greater reserves for our fund balance, I will ask one question first to Jared. What is the actual dollar number of our fund balance today, roughly?
The dollar number is just over 80 million.
Is over 80 million.
That's as of the end of FY25 and what was reported in our annual financial report.
Okay. And how is the available fund balance ratio calculated?
From Moody's?
Yeah, is it the fund balance divided by the operating?
In simple terms, it's the fund balance divided by the operating revenues. Unfortunately, it's not quite that straightforward because what Moody's is doing is they're looking at the total governmental fund balance. So, as Jared mentioned, it's $80.2 million of unassigned fund balance, right? Moody's is kind of changing the language on us. We're used to thinking this in terms of unassigned fund balance, right? Your policy speaks to unassigned fund balance, and that's over $80 million. But the problem is Moody's looks at total governmental funds. So that includes the general fund, the capital project funds, Board of Education funds, ARPA fund, all those funds. That number, when you roll it up to total governmental funds, is reduced by a deficit in the capital project fund, which a deficit in the capital project fund is not unusual. It says in the audit that'll be addressed by future bond issues. But the Moody's methodology, unfortunately, doesn't really adjust for that adequately. And then the other, just one last point is then what they do is they take for fund balance, the difference between the net current assets and liabilities in the enterprise funds and the internal service fund. So they are bringing in the net current, the difference between the current liabilities and current assets into this, which currently is a strength, which historically has been a strength. But the internal service fund in particular, I'm sure you're aware, had a difficult year in 2025. And so the point is, if that's not addressed adequately, or it takes a significant amount of time to be addressed, that's going to be a headwind.
So I would like to then observe, so this Moody's scorecard that you presented today, compared to the one that was presented in August 2024, it shows that we're doing, because of the economy, it shows that we're actually doing better on all of the metrics, with the exception of fund balance, which we are down in ratio by 100 basis points. And so if I say here, the fund balance here that you've said here is 24.8, giving us a single A rating. Last year, we were at 25.8%, giving us a double A rating. And the year before that, we were at 27.3% for the fund balance. Now, so one of the reasons why we are a AAA city is because of the strength of our ground list and the real estate. And one of that reasons why is because Moody's and S&P know that if there is an issue with our balance sheet and with our finances, we can raise taxes. So that is what is the measurement. So when I look at, so that's the issue, is there is the ability to raise taxes to clean up whatever financial issues that we have. So when I go back and I look at what's the budget that has been presented this year, we have a $15 million variance because of employee benefits. And if you're saying that our fund balance is now low, and I would calculate that our fund balance probably, there's two ways to change the fund balance number, that fund balance ratio, is to increase the cash reserve or to lower the budget spending. And if I look at our taxation, where, you're looking at a mean increase in people's taxes of anywhere from 10% to 17%, that is really high. And you're talking about an increase in the budget which exceeds inflation, which exceeds what people are going to get for their Social Security checks or whatever. So where is that money going to come from? So my recommendation to the BET and the City Council is if we have these issues on the OPEB and the fund balance being decreased, that's because we spent too much in the previous years. And we should not ask the taxpayer this year to make up for what we spent in the OPEB, which we took from the OPEB in previous years, not OPEB, but I'm sorry, the employee benefits, and which we also took from the fund balance. Because every year we go through the budgeting and people say, oh, we're going to take this much from the reserve fund. And we all say, is that okay? Are we going to be jeopardizing our rating? And everybody comes back and says, well, we think it's okay. So I think the message that you're trying to say here in this meeting, that despite the fact that our ratings are better in the scorecard, the one rating which we're doing poorly in is the fund balance. And there are two ways of fixing the fund balance: is to raise taxes to do it, or to reduce expenses. And the beauty of reducing the expenses is it lowers the denominator so that the actual amount that we have is a higher ratio. Would you say that that is correct, Mr. Lindsay?
Yes, in broad terms, yes, I would agree.
So I think the good news, what I see here, and then I compare, because I looked at last year's very carefully, is that we're doing a great job. Jared's group and Chitsime are doing a great job on the capital and the debt balance. And we're not doing so badly on the scorecard. What we're not doing well is the available fund balance. And the reason why is because we spent it. And we cannot ask the taxpayer this year or in the future to pay more taxes to top up the fund balance of money that we overspent in previous years. So that is my observation from the cheap seats.
I think those are fair observations, Ann. I think they're probably the observations of the entire group. I think that's what we need to make sure we keep front and center as we go through our budget deliberations over the next several weeks. And it's something that, as I look to my council member peers, that we really need to keep in mind as we set a budget cap for the coming year as well, right? You said it very well, you said it very articulately, but we cannot continue just to overspend because we are at the point where that is what is going to impact our rating and the quality of life for our citizens. So I think we need to take that into our deliberations. I think we also, though, need to be respectful here of time and the fact that there's a meeting following this. So unless there's any truly pressing item from the BET side, I'd suggest we close and allow the rest of tonight's business to move forward, taking Ms. Yang's points very seriously as we go through the next month of deliberations.
Add this, Troy, real quick, realizing there's a time. Just the great comments by Ann, and obviously there's no more wiggle room on the fund balance, and we really have to. And obviously, we were faced 2 years ago. We're in year 3 of the phase-in when we were given these options of very high taxes to our constituents here, residents in the city, and adding the numbers that were just approved by our colleagues on the council. That rate is going to go up pretty substantially. And you talk about inflation. I mean, inflation is 3%. 17% is kind of unacceptable. The other thing is our largest expense. The problem with if we lose our credit rating is, or we get downgraded, the largest expense line item is, and Jared, you could tell us, isn't it a debt service? So any downgrade will mean increased interest rates, which will in turn obviously be a bigger problem for the city. Is that correct, Jared? Besides the Board of Ed, obviously. It's one of our major lines of service.
It's the largest single line item. If you don't combine salaries into one, if you were to combine all the salaries, so that would be a larger item.
So any downgrade would obviously be a tremendous problem for the city. So thank you, Ed. Those are my comments. Obviously, we got our work cut out for us.
On that note, I want to thank the BET for being able to stop by tonight, and also to Unistat for giving a brilliant. Bill Lindsay, it's always great to see you and listen to you, and I'm just so impressed with how these numbers just roll off your tongue. It's really amazing. But I think it was a really very, very important message that we got, and it's important to keep what Ms. Yang has said in mind as we go through our further budget negotiations. So thank you very much. And with that, I'll close the meeting.
Thank you, Jim.